Welcome to Westonka Memories. I'm Becky Thorpe. I volunteer with the Westonka Historical Society. Today we're interviewing Joy Grundeen. Joy's family came here in the 1920s and she grew up, and we're just going to hear about her memories.
Good morning, Becky. It's a nice day to have a visit. It's a rainy day here today, and it's nice to have a little visit.
It is, Joy. It's nice to see you.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to say that Joy and I worked together at Shirley Hills for 20 some years. And Joy always has, if you ever needed to know anything about Mound and its history, Joy was the go-to person. So we're going to dig into her knowledge a little bit today. So Joy, tell me about when your family first came to Mound and why they decided to come to Mound.
Sure. Well, my grandmother and my grandmother had a cousin that lived kind of right behind the A&W drive-in, and she said, "This is a wonderful place to come. You know, why don't you come? And I know there's a house for sale that you can buy." And so my mother and my grandmother came here to Mound, and in the early 20s, and the house that they bought was the first site of the Twin Birch nursing home, and it was a big white house on County Road 15 at the present site of the Lake Minnetonka shores. My grandmother came, and this was during the Depression years, and there were a lot of fruit trees on the property, and my grandma had a big house, and she was a good cook, and she opened the house up to boarders, and a lot of the local people that would hire young men, especially that needed a place to stay, they would recommend my grandma, and they would get their noon meal there, and also a place to live. And my father was one of the boarders. He was from Virginia, Minnesota, and again, he grew up during the Depression, and after he graduated from high school, he wanted to come down to Minneapolis, and he went to Dunwoody, and they placed him as a job as an auto mechanic, and the building is still there in Seton. It's right by the Seton Bridge, and it was a gas station for many, many generations. And my father first started working there in the 30s, and then he later went on to own it. But over the years, my grandmother had a reputation of being a kind person and a good cook, and a lot of people would say, "Well, gee, I have an elderly mother. I just can't handle it anymore. Could you have her care for her? Or I have a bachelor brother. We'd really like to have a room for him." And the nursing home just kind of evolved from there.
That's fascinating, Joy. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us the name of your grandmother?
Sure. My grandmother's name was Alice Westland. She was a widow, and my mother's name was Hazel Crop. And again, they both migrated here from the Amory, Wisconsin area.
And your father's name?
He was Luther Anderson.
Luther Anderson.
Luther Anderson, yes. And he married the landlady's daughter.
That's a great story. So the boarding house, did it have a name besides just a reputation?
It was called the Twin Birch restaurant.
Oh, okay. So that's how the name came about.
Right. There were two birch trees down by what is now Highway 15, and so it was called Twin Birch because there was two birch trees there. Okay,
so that's your family's migration to Mound history. So, and then you came along. Did you have any sisters or brothers? And I also have to ask you where your mom and dad decided to live in Mound and why they decided to stay here.
Well, they bought it. Actually, I've never lived in Mound. I've always lived in the Spring Park, Navarre area, mainly.
Okay, the Westonka area.
Westonka area. So my parents' first home was a little cottage on Black Lake, which was just about a block from the nursing home. And that's purposely why they chose that place to live, because it was close to Grandma's. And ironically, the cottage that my parents bought was a family cottage of the Andrews sisters.
Really?
And had their cousins lived next door, and their name was on the deed of sale. My father kept that because it had Maxine Andrews' signature on it, and he always thought that was kind of neat. So they had bought the surrounding cottage of their families to have. So that was my parents' first house, and this was
Did they ever
after
meet the Andrews sisters?
many times. I remember Maxine especially coming to town, and I remember one summer Maxine's son spent the summer here. They lived in California, and she wanted him to have a Minnesota experience, and he was just about a year older than I was, so he spent the summer here, and we had great fun fishing in Black Lake. And
what a wonderful memory.
yeah.
So you have deep roots here in Mound, or the Westonka area, excuse me.
Yeah.
So do you have a really happy memory of growing up in that
Very,
cottage?
yes, I have a picture of my mom and dad here. This was from their 25th wedding anniversary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but yes, very much. Again, it was a wonderful place to grow up. Neighbors helped neighbors. You know, you went outside and played all day and swam all day, and it was a wonderful way to grow up. Everybody kind of knew each other. And another kind of fun thing that was a part of my childhood is my father felt a strong need to be involved with the community and get to know his neighbors. And he was elected as a justice of the peace in Spring Park. That was the way the judicial system was at that time. And so we would have weddings at our house, and
really?
Yeah. And this was during the era of the Lakeview and the Downbeat, and there was kind of a lot of summer traffic in Spring Park, and he was a justice of the peace that would have court every week, and he worked in close friendship with some of the local policemen in the area, Ray Tharlson, Debbie Heights' father, and Don Wilkes, who was the chief of police in Spring Park, and they were very good friends, and they all worked together. One interesting thing about the three of them, they all really believed in the young people, in the teenagers in the community. And they all three if they saw a young man especially that was perhaps going down a wrong path, they would kind of try to do their best to take them under their wing and kind of help them get on the straight path of life. And I have had a number of men that have come back and told me that, how my dad was so nice. And there were a couple of funny stories too that went involved with that. There one time there was a young man that was home for college at the Downbeat, and he did something he was supposed to, and he appeared before my dad, and my dad knew that if he imposed a fine on him, that he would just have his father pay the fine, and that was that. And my father wanted to teach the young man a lesson, and so he did a court order that he had to send in his grades every month, and every month send a church bulletin and a synopsis of the church sermon. And he was court ordered then to do that once a month for a year, and he said, "I'll see you again next summer." And the next summer the young man came back and he said, "You know, I really hated you last summer, but I understand what you were trying to do."
Oh,
and
that's
I really
a wonderful story.
Appreciate, he said, "I appreciate what you did for me." And
wow.
So that was kind of cute. And there were other stories too where there would be people down on their luck, and my dad knew that, and he would take great pride in helping people that were down on their luck. And I know there was another time that he had someone in court that had done a misdeed of some sort, and the fellow had a family and he didn't have a job, and he just was really down on his luck. And so my dad went to Cox Brothers and got the man a job as Cox Brothers. He went up to Piggly Wiggly and got him a grocery certificate. And this was in the days of black and white TV, and he went to the black and white TV shop and they gave him a TV, and he went over to the family and he said, well, here's a TV for your kids. I've got a job lined up for you. Here's some money
Wow.
for groceries. And
What a
the
great man.
dad just really took pride, and the children, oh, we've got a TV and there's food coming. And he just took great pride in that.
And help get their lives turned around. It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. And
So,
my dad was a bus driver I'm a second generation school district employee. My dad was also a school bus driver. A lot of fun stories with that too. You know, that was back in the days before there were lifts for wheelchairs on buses. And if it would be someone with a broken leg, my dad would have to stop the bus and get out and carry the child up into the bus seat and carry the crutches up. And on the return trip, he'd have to carry the child off the bus. And many young people have come back and said, oh, your dad was such a fun bus driver and I really enjoyed him. And
he sounds like he was a very caring person.
he was very involved in the community. And I think that's where I decided that I wanted to be involved with the community too and the people around me.
You
So.
wanted to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Which I wanted to talk to you a little bit too about your memories of growing up, and you've done a lot of that, which is good. I was going to ask you if you ever got to listen to your dad's court or watch any wedding ceremonies.
Yeah, I know there was a few times that my mother was sick, and I have a sister who's 9.5 years older than I am, and she wasn't around, and I would just have to kind of go to court and sit in the corner and wait for him. And so yeah, there were a few times. Yeah. I do have a picture of my sister Mary Alice and I.
Oh, wow.
1958. So that was kind of fun.
That's lovely. And you talked a bit about school, and I wanted to ask you what school buildings, the physical buildings you went to, and memories of favorite teachers to start with.
Sure. Well, I went to kindergarten to the old Spring Park's 2-room schoolhouse. So that is now the Spring Park Village Hall, but at that time it was located where Calvary Memorial Church is. So that's where I went to kindergarten. And they tried to group the kids that lived in Spring Park and Navarre to each end of town. And then I went to Shirley Hills for a few grades, and then there was some configuration where I was down at Spring Park again for a year.
Shirley Hills, excuse me, what was it, like grades 1 through?
At that time it was K through 6, I believe. But as numbers involved, that was before the days of Hilltop, and so they had to kind of maneuver kids with classroom numbers during that time. So yes, I did my elementary years at Shirley Hills, and then went on to Grandview, and during that time it was 7, 8, 9 at that time. So, and then on to the high school, which was in downtown Mound at that time, with the circular pods that everyone remembers it. So
sure.
And they were good years. Yeah, they were very good years.
Do you have a particular teacher that stands out in mind as someone who maybe was extra special?
Oh, many. It's too hard because there were many of them that I felt that were part of my nurturing. Mr. Robert Heitman, who was the original, well, actually, he wasn't. The original principal at Shirley Hills was Evelyn Crary, but I had Mr. Heitman for 6th grade, and he was one of my favorite teachers. And then later on, when my daughters were getting ready to start school, I knew that I wanted to volunteer there because I had enjoyed my years at Shirley Hills a lot. And he's probably one of my favorite teachers, yes.
Oh, great. Your days when you were, say, in Shirley Hills, do you remember what the day looked like? Did you stay with the same group of kids, or did you move around a little bit?
Oh, no, you stayed with the same group of kids, but you have to remember, again, this was during the time when we had the Cuban crisis and the missile days and doing the drills where the atomic bomb drills, and
Mm-hmm.
hiding under your desks, and
All of that fun stuff. So when you got to Grandview, was it a big change for you? Did you start moving around from room to room then?
Yeah, of course it was. Of course it was. But, you know, again, the school district was pretty small then, where you kind of knew everybody. And this was kind of before the days of Hilltop. So you did kind of go to school with all those same kids the whole time.
Sure. And when you got to high school, then I'm sure it was very exciting. And do you have memories of being a senior and your graduation memories?
Oh, sure, sure. And again, a few years back, we celebrated our 50th class reunion. I graduated in 1967, and that was great fun. And it was a great fun being a part of that, of being on the committee to help do that. That was great fun. And we kind of hashed over a lot of stories and of the great fun that we had with cars and learning how to drive and weather and the dances. Sure. Just, and again, everybody kind of knew everybody else. It was pretty self-contained.
That sounds like a fine way to grow up. But I have a question about the drive-in. Did you get to go there, and do you have memories of watching movies at the drive-in?
Oh, certainly, certainly. Again, I think most people know it's kind of a kitty corner from where Good Shepherd Lutheran Church is. And yes, it was a fun thing to do. And again, a lot of kids would kind of pile in cars. I never really did that, but kids would pile in the back of cars, and
try to
sneak in a place to see your friends, and they
Do you
would have
remember a movie you watched there that stands out?
No, I really don't remember one particular movie. There was also the drive-in in 7 High, which is in 7 and 101. That was another drive-in. So, you know, there were options. And also during those days, you had the movie theater in Excelsior and Wazetta. And so that was something that we all did too. You'd go to the movie, and again, before driving days, you know, perhaps one parent would drop you and your friend off and another parent would pick you up. And so we had options. It wasn't just the drive-in movies.
And did you have the option of shopping? I remember Mound had some really fun stores back then.
Oh, sure. Again, you know, we were pretty self-contained then. And, you know, that's your doctor was there, your lawyer was there, the grocery store was there. And the dry goods store was there, and you know that was a place to go and get a new skirt or some material. And also Williams Shoe Store was another place to go and get some new clothes.
Didn't have to leave town.
No. And then again, we had Sears on Wards for a while, a catalog spot, so you could order from the catalog and then go pick it up right in Mound. And
those were the days, weren't they?
They were. And again, with the Nike base in St. Bonnie, there wasn't a lot of shopping available there. So they would come to Mound. There were a lot of military people that would come to Mound from the Nike base during that time, especially on Friday after they got paid.
Do you remember, obviously you remember when it was built, but do you remember hearing adults talk about having the Nike base built so close?
Oh, sure. There was concern. Yeah, well, it was concern. It was concern because, you know, it was in the Midwest, and it was always the concern that, you know, if a missile would come down, that it certainly would affect us in our area. And so, yeah, there always was a concern. But there was also just a lot of there was more people. Again, we had Tonka Toys, you know, that was working around the clock. And after my parents sold the nursing home in 1974. And at that time, I went to work at Mound Clinic, and I was hired by Dr. Ramos and Dr. Carlson. And I was
in what capacity?
I was a nurse, and I worked there as a nurse for a number of years. My parents were ready to retire and sell the nursing home, and I was ready to kind of try new adventures. And so I worked a number of years there full time, and then I met my husband and got married. And then after I had a family, I worked part time for a number of years. So in all, I worked there 20 years. So I always feel I kind of had a career there too as
You
well.
did. You had two careers.
Yeah.
Backing up a little bit to your high school days and being a senior, what prompted you to go to nursing school and become a nurse?
Well, I always wanted to be a nurse because of helping in the family nursing home. It just was always kind of a given, you know, that's what I would do. And I kind of always, yeah. One fun high school memory I wanted to bring up too is during your junior and senior year, you had the option of taking your study hall and working in the office. And I worked in the office at the high school for my study hall during junior and senior year. And I just really loved that. I really loved the atmosphere of the office and the office ladies. And I remember they gave me some extra little special things to do, and I felt so important because they trusted me. That I remember they had me bring a deposit to the bank, and
wow.
I remember they had me bring the homecoming robe to the dry cleaners after homecoming. And again, I remember one of the doctor's children was not feeling well, and they asked me to escort the doctor's child across the street to the doctor's office so the child could see their dad. And I felt very important that
I'm sure they relied on you too. That's great. So you decided to be a nurse. Where did you go to nursing school?
I went to nursing school at Bethesda Lutheran Hospital in St. Paul. And that was right by the Capitol. That was my first time away from home. It was a little hard, but that was really the only time I was away from home too, was during my years in nurses training.
So Mound had a big pull on you, the Westonka area.
Yeah, yes.
So, and you kind of just glided over meeting your husband. We need to hear that story.
Oh, sure. Well, that was kind of a fun story too. My husband was a very kind, nice, soft-spoken man. He was kind of one of the nice guys. And I had a girlfriend that I bowled with on a Monday night bowling league in the Mound.
And where was this? The Mound Bowling Alley?
Mm-hmm. And my husband had a roommate that kind of had a crush on one of the gals on the bowling league. And his roommate said, come on, let's go watch the ladies bowl. So they kind of kept coming on Monday nights to watch us bowl, and we all just kind of finally started to talk. And of course, my husband's roommate and the gal he had a crush on, that kind of never evolved anywhere. But my husband and I were both kind of the quiet ones, and we both kind of sat on the quiet end of the table. And
oh, I can just picture that. That's great. So where was your husband from?
He was a Minneapolis boy. He was raised in Minneapolis, and he had an aunt and uncle that had a summer cabin in the Forest Lake area in the North Arm area. And he would come out and fish a lot. They'd come out on Sunday to see the aunt and uncle, you know, at the lake. And he just fell in love with the lake area. And he just kind of always decided when he grew up, he wanted to buy a home and be on the lake, that it was just a place he wanted to be in.
Okay,
So
you answered my question about how did you and your husband decide to live here?
Yeah. Well, we both, you know, he lived here already, and I had grown up here. And
sure. So you had your two careers basically. You worked for 20 years at the clinic, so you must have really liked that job. If you were
I did. I enjoyed the people, and I just enjoyed the clinic atmosphere too. I enjoyed the doctors were very kind to me. Again, these were my young years in my 20s, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about people, and it was a wonderful place. I had a lot of role models with Dr. Omnis and Dr. Carlson too.
You didn't stay there for your whole career. What prompted you to try a second career?
Sure, that was after my daughters were born, and I kind of made my mind up. I wanted to be involved with my kids' lives, and that I wanted to be involved with their school careers. And so I decided I wanted to volunteer. And one of the teachers was doing a blood pressure unit at Shirley Hills, and they were looking for a nurse to come and help teach the fifth graders how to check blood pressures. I knew Bob Heitman was the principal there, and I knew what a wonderful man he had been. And I just kind of started hanging out there. And then pretty soon it was time for my daughter to go to kindergarten. And I just kind of started hanging out there more and more. And my first job at the school district was I was the volunteer coordinator, and I worked an hour and 15 minutes every day. That was my allotted time on my contract.
And your foot into the door.
And it was perfect. I was able to work during the years when my daughters were in kindergarten and in preschool, and that hour and a half I was really able to drop them off at preschool or kindergarten and get that hour and a half job in and still be there to pick them up. And it was perfect.
It sounds like it was. So how did you get into your job as the school nurse at Shirley Hills?
Well, I had been working as a volunteer coordinator, and then there was an opening as a paraprofessional, and I did that for a year. And then there was an opening in the health office. The lady in the health office was ready to retire, and during that span, the principal was Rich Nicoli, and he was another dear role model in my life. Very soft-spoken and very kind and generous to everyone. And so I thought, well, I'll apply and see if perhaps he'll hire me. And he did. And I ended up staying at Shirley Hills for about 25 years.
And Rich told me one time that he hired good people. I'm sure you were one of those that he was thinking of. You've mentioned role models, and you've mentioned some great ones. Are there any others that you have encountered growing up and living and working in Mound?
Well, certainly my husband was a role model of hard work, and he worked at the telephone company for over 40 years. That was the only job he had. So he certainly was a role model on how to be calm, cool, and collected and about people. And again, certainly my grandmother and my father and my mother from my early years. My mother was the quiet one. She kind of stayed home and kind of kept the home fires burning and kept supper ready for my dad. And my dad was, as I said, very involved. He was also on the Spring Park Council. And so he kind of was always coming and going a lot for meetings. And my mom was kind of a homebody that stayed home. So, but they all were role models. My mother certainly was another role model for me, for my children.
And then you mentioned the professional doctors and Rich.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some great people that have decided to live and work in Mound. So, talking about your work life in both of your workplaces, did you learn life lessons from either place? And if so, what were they? Would you like to talk about those?
Oh, just listening to people and being kind to people, and understanding that everybody has a hardship, and we need to be patient with everyone and try to help everyone the best that we can.
It's a good lesson to learn.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a good interview with a Moundite if we didn't touch on the tornado for a bit. So I think we need to talk about that a little bit if you would like.
It had been a very humid day all day, just very sticky. You kind of knew there was going to be a storm. And it was towards evening, supper time, and my mother had laundry on the clothesline, and we knew it was going to storm. And my father was sitting in his easy chair watching the TV and reading the paper, and my mother came in and said, it's so strange. It's almost like I hear a tornado outside. Well, my dad, of course, knew what that meant, and he quickly put the paper down and said, we're heading to the basement. And so by the time we got to the basement, though, of course, it was all over. And shortly there, I suppose an hour or so later, I don't remember, the phone rang. and it was one of the administrators from Mound, and they said, we need everybody that we can get to come and help. And so my dad was asked to be at the Spring Park side of the bridge, because we kind of were Spring Park oriented, of the bridge to go over to the island. And so he was awake that night, you know, because they only wanted people that lived there to come in and out. So he did an all-night shift representing the Spring Park, the city of Spring Park, to kind of help until help did come.
Okay, so were you, I'm sure you were in high school at that time. So
Yes.
what were your memories of how you felt, what you and your friends were going through?
Well, I'm trying to, it was at Grandview, so I think it was probably 8th grade. And we had a lot of debris in our yard. But of course, our biggest concern was the nursing home and the residents in the nursing home. And we're very blessed that we did not have any damage. And we were very, very blessed with that. But because we didn't have any damage, I had to go to school the next day. There was nobody in school. Everyone was kind of in a state of shock. And we just kind of all drifted, I think, for a few days until.
Do you remember like seeing something that looked really devastating to you? Like, I know the whole area was devastated, but do you have one specific memory?
Well, no, not really. We did have a lot of debris that that did come in. And again, certainly I had a lot of friends that lived in various parts of Island Park and Navarre, and that all had stories to tell, and stories of things that happened at their house. So it was a very scary time.
I'm sorry, but how about like the area in Navarre that was just flat?
Yeah, it was just flat, devastated. Yes, it was. And in a few days, we were certainly able to kind of get in the car and drive around and look and see where the damage was in Navarre and in the island. And
yeah, wow. Yeah, that had to have been scary. So we're kind of coming to the end of our questions here, but would you like to share anything that we haven't touched on?
Well, I've always enjoyed living in this area. My children, I have 2 daughters, and they kind of both give me a bad time because they've traveled the world, and I've continued to stay in Mound, and they kind of tease me about that. But I've enjoyed the community, and I just enjoy what the community has to offer, and enjoy the growing up in this wonderful community.
So. You've certainly contributed to it being wonderful, Joy. You're a giving person.
Yeah.
How would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered as a wonderful mother and a wonderful nurse, and someone who cares about other people.
I think you can check all those boxes. I guess that's it if you don't have anything else.
I don't. Thank you for doing this, Becky. I enjoyed it. I'm glad we had an opportunity to visit today.
Oh, thank you, Joy. Like I said at the beginning, it's always been a pleasure to talk with you about anything, but talking about Mound history,
sure.
That's your forte.
Sure. Well,
stories.
There are a couple other videos out that my sister and I did a little talk for the Historical Society on the Spring Park Glory Days, and we talked a little bit about the history of Twin Birch on that video. And there is another video out about the history of Twin Birch and how that evolved with my family. So there are other pictures that are on other videos that.
I'm assuming those are probably available at the Historical Society.
Yeah, they are. I've seen them. They're on YouTube and you know, the other videos that are out and about there.
We recommend watching those. And
yeah,
I think it's just fascinating how your family started the nursing home, which morphed into the Presbyterian.
Yeah, yes, and my parents and my grandparents would be just so amazed at
to
that.
see what come of that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they would be.
From your caring family.
Yeah.